There are 6 clear signs that ocean cruising won't resume until 2021. I'm Gary Bembridge, and this is Tips for Travellers. You can book a cruise right now in 2020 and into January and beyond in 2021. However, there are many signs suggesting that those cruises will just not be running. I'm going to explore 6 big signs and reasons why I say that. First of all, the cruise lines themselves are not expecting cruising to happen until 2021. In the last couple of days before I recorded this, Princess Cruises announced that they were postponing and cancelling pretty much all cruises around the world until the middle of December. So they've cancelled cruises all around the Caribbean, California, Hawaii, Mexico, the Panama Canal, South America, Antarctica, Japan, Tahiti, and Asia. And they've also postponed Australia way into August. Princess Cruises has traditionally been the first of the cruise lines to move with cancellations. They are not expecting to sail really in 2020. Some UK-based lines like Cunard have already cancelled through to November, and expectations is that could keep coming. We've also seen all the cruise lines have gone back into the markets again to raise more money to tide them over so that they can basically keep operating with no revenue coming in 2020. So all the signs by the cruise lines are that they are not expecting cruises to happen anytime soon, even though they're still selling cruises. Linked to that, there are no finally developed and agreed plans to resume passenger cruising that have to be agreed with the key health authorities around the world. So for example, that is the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States, which have the final say on cruising, or even if you take places like the UK with Public Health England. These plans have not been fully developed and they have not been agreed. There are some initiatives underway. So for example, Royal Caribbean Group and Norwegian Cruise Line Group, they formed the Healthy Sailing Initiative with a group of experts, but they're not even going to report back until the end of August, and then the plans start to be developed and submitted. The CEO of the Carnival Corporation Group, Arnold Donald, in a recent interview admitted that we have not actually gotten to the point of serious resumption of cruise discussions with the CDC, but of course that's coming. So there's no fully developed plans. All the discussions, certainly in the US with the CDC on ocean cruising, is all related up until now to crew repatriation. So it's going to take a while still for plans to be developed and agreed. This is unlikely to happen quickly. The third reason why there won't be cruising in 2020 and it won't happen until 2021 is there's nowhere to cruise to. When we talk about ocean cruising, we're mostly talking about 2 big areas. First of all, the Caribbean, which requires sailing between multiple countries, i.e. multiple different islands. And secondly, the big other cruising area is the Mediterranean, which again involves cruising between multiple countries around Europe. However, it's going to be a long time before inter-country cruising is going to be open. We're seeing that many ports are closed. Spain have completely closed to cruise ships. The Caribbean has started to open but closed down again. So many of those islands in the Caribbean are expressly not open to cruise ships. So for example, Grand Cayman, the Bahamas reversed a plan to open up and they've closed again indefinitely to cruise ships. If you want to cruise around the Caribbean, many of those islands also require COVID-19 tests before people can come in. So that includes places like Aruba, Belize, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, St. Lucia, St. Martin. We're seeing increasing resistance by ports to have cruise ships coming in. So for example, in the United States, we've seen Bar Harbor in Maine vote to exclude cruise ships, certainly for the rest of this year. We've seen Key West putting a referendum in place, which is talking about banning certainly large cruise ships coming in. Canada's closed, Australia's closed, the Seychelles is closed. So we're seeing a huge resistance to cruise ships moving between countries, which is a fundamental part of mainstream cruising. What we have seen is some local cruising for local countries. So if you're a Norwegian citizen, you can go cruising, ocean cruising around Norway. If you're a French citizen, you can go cruising around French ports on a French cruise line. Germany started cruises to nowhere for German passengers. And there's some discussion around whether that's going to happen in the UK or Italy. So certainly big mainstream ocean cruising cannot start up because there's just not enough ports open and countries willing to have ships moving between different countries in one cruise. US passengers are also fundamental to cruising. They are the vast bulk of cruise passengers, and many countries are not accepting US passengers entering. So that's many places in the Caribbean, so you're right through the EU, the UK, and many other countries have restrictions on US passengers moving and actually entering the countries to visit in the first place, let alone board cruise ships. Cruise lines will find it very difficult to start big mainstream cruising if US passengers are excluded from boarding ships. The fourth key sign, which shows that it's going to be extremely difficult to impossible to start cruising until we head into next year, is the ability to get crew back on board. In fact, cruise lines are still trying to repatriate crew, and there's very few crew now on board ships. You're going to need thousands and thousands of crew to head back to reman ships, and that is virtually impossible with huge travel restrictions in places like India and the Philippines, and also just the availability of flights to be able to move crew around. If they want to bring crew back by ship, which they often did to repatriate crew, that's going to take a while for those ships to get back and in place and get approval by authorities to let crew board. So the ability of getting crew back to man ships in 2020 seems virtually impossible. A good example of that is in Germany, where they are starting those cruises to nowhere for German passengers. They've had to delay some of those sailings because of their difficulty of getting actually crew back to man the ship. Probably one of the biggest barriers to cruising starting until 2021 is the belief by health authorities that cruising is the most risky of all settings people can be in for transmission and catching COVID-19. This is an area where cruise lines are going to have to do an enormous job to try and shift that mindset. If we take a look at some recent statements, so the CDC, for example, in their most recent no-sail order, they issued a 20-page document, and they were very clear that they see cruising as the highest risk of any other setting for people to enter. They spoke there about the fact that 80% of ships that were in American waters between the 1st of March and the 10th of July, 80% of ships had some kind of COVID-19 confirmed or suspected outbreak, and that some of those were still ongoing at the time of the most recent no-sail order. They also quote the fact that you've seen on some cruise ships like the Diamond Princess an R rate, the rate of people spreading the disease, of being almost 15, versus even in the biggest cities outbreaks where you had an R rate of 3 to 4. And bear in mind that since cruising is entirely recreational, where unlike, say, airlines, which have both a commercial, a strategic, a business slant, as well as recreational travel, they see no incentive in opening up recreational travel on cruise ships when they see them as being highly infectious. They see that because of the concentrated nature of being on board a ship, so people are in a much more concentrated environment, even with some degree of lower capacity. They also point out that the crew are often in quite cramped quarters, sharing quarters, again increasing the risk of transmission. Also, they believe that with lower capacity, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem, because they point out that actually there was still COVID-19 outbreaks on board ships when there was just crew and no passengers. One of the biggest barriers to governments allowing cruising to start certainly in 2020 and into 2021 is the concern that if they let cruising start up and there is an outbreak on board ships, that this will place enormous and unwanted stress on already stretched government, regional, state and local facilities and resources. Already all of those are extremely stretched as it is with coping with the situation on land, and they're really concerned that they will exacerbate and create more problems by allowing cruise ships to sail. Government authorities basically just see it as too risky allowing people on and off ships in the current state of the pandemic, which is probably going to rumble on for many months. Bear in mind, at this point in time, we have relatively high levels and growing rates of infections in part of the United States. We're seeing that also happening in parts of South America. We've also seen a real concern around second waves in many countries as they start to open up their economies. And also, very importantly, we're seeing even in countries with low infections that you can have local peaks of infection and local lockdowns. It's happened in Germany, it's happened in Australia, it's happened in the UK, Spain, and even in parts of Asia like Japan and South Korea. So there's a real concern that if they open up cruising, if they allow people to start coming on and off ships with just the volatility that you have of the virus around the world, that it's just a risk they don't need to or want to take. So they basically don't want to let cruisers go where they see it's too risky. They are concerned that if there is an outbreak on a ship, it's going to basically swamp the local resources, and they see that it's a completely unnecessary thing to do. There are quite a few signs building that cruising is unlikely to start up in 2020 and really is only likely to start up in 2021. What do you think about the state of cruising, and do you think cruising is going to start sooner? And I'm taking a more pessimistic view than you believe. I'd love to hear what you think. I have loads more videos of updates, tips and advice about cruising So why don't you also watch another one of those right now?